It was 6:14 in the morning when my phone rang. I was barely awake. The sun hadn't even broken over the horizon yet, and the dew was still clinging to the grass outside my ranch house. I glanced at the caller ID. Clyde, my foreman. He never called unless something was wrong. I answered, still half asleep. But the urgency in his voice snapped me out of my daze instantly. Boss, you need to come down to the well. Now. It's bad. Those words sent a jolt through me. I threw on my boots, grabbed my hat, and jumped in my truck. As I tore down the gravel road toward the old well site, my mind raced through every possibility: a burst pipe, a collapsed wall, some wild animal fallen in. Nothing prepared me for what I was about to see. When I pulled up, Clyde was standing there with two of the ranch hands, all of them staring down the shaft like they'd just seen a ghost. I got out and walked over slowly, and then I saw it. My heart stopped. The well, our primary water source for the entire ranch, was filled to the brim with drying cement. Not a blockage, not mud, not an accident. Deliberate sabotage. Someone had pumped wet concrete into our water source. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just stood there, stunned, staring at the pale gray mass inside the shaft. This wasn't some random act of vandalism. This was personal, and only one group had the motivation to do something like this: the HOA. 3 months ago, the HOA board from the new housing development bordering my ranch came knocking. They showed up all polite and neighborly at first. Karen Whitmore, their president, even brought cookies. But their visit had a clear agenda. They wanted me to formally join the HOA, adopt their landscaping rules, noise restrictions, fencing regulations, and eliminate unsightly operations like open grazing and target practice on my private range. I politely declined. I'd owned this ranch long before the suburb crept up to our fence line. This land was in my family for generations. I wasn't about to let a bunch of clipboard-wielding newcomers tell me how to run it. But apparently, Karen and her board didn't take rejection lightly. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. Complaints about my cattle being too noisy, citations from the county mysteriously showing up for supposed code violations, anonymous reports sent to the EPA about chemical use. Every single one, baseless. I dealt with them all, figured it was just part of standing my ground. But this, cement in the well, that crossed a line so far, I couldn't even see it anymore. Someone must have done it in the middle of the night. Clyde said, still shaken. We checked it yesterday afternoon, clean as ever. The realization hit me like a punch. They'd come onto my land under cover of darkness, trespassed, and sabotaged our water supply. That well wasn't just some old hole in the ground, it was our lifeline. It watered over 200 head of cattle, ran through the house, the barn, the irrigation lines, and the backup tanks. Without it, I had maybe 3 days before things got desperate. I called the sheriff right there on the spot. To his credit, he arrived within the hour. We gave statements, showed him the site, even found faint tire tracks leading to the north fence line close to where the new development started. But as expected, when the sheriff questioned the HOA board, they claimed ignorance. Karen had the audacity to meet him on her porch wearing a silk robe, sipping coffee like she hadn't just declared war on a working ranch. We don't know anything about a well, she said sweetly. Maybe it was an old construction issue, but she slipped up. That well was an eyesore anyway, she muttered, just loud enough for the deputy to catch. That's when I knew. This wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. It was calculated. And they thought they could get away with it because they assumed I was just some backwoods rancher with no legal pull or connections. They thought wrong. Because what they didn't know is that I'd been on the county agriculture board for over 6 years. I had friends in environmental services, code enforcement, the sheriff's office, and even the mayor's staff. More importantly, I had footage. I rushed back to my office and pulled up the surveillance cameras from the north gate. Sure enough, there it was, 3:42 a.m., a landscaping truck, unmarked, creeping onto my property. No headlights, 2 figures hopped out. One rolled a hose from the back of the truck, and for the next 20 minutes, they worked quickly, staying in the shadows. Then they drove off. I zoomed in. The truck's plate was caked in mud, but a partial number was visible. That was enough. I passed it to the sheriff. He promised to follow up. But by now, I knew the board would deny everything. Blame a rogue contractor, or say it was a misunderstanding. What they didn't understand was that out here, you don't mess with a man's water. Not in the dry parts of Texas, where every drop counts. Not on land that feeds dozens of families and livestock. I looked out at my herd, grazing near the Westfield, unaware of the disaster quietly creeping toward them. No water meant stress. Stress meant weight loss, disease, even death. And if it rained, the runoff from the drying concrete could poison the ground nearby. This wasn't just vandalism, it was biological warfare. I stood there that morning, watching the sun finally peek over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dry dirt. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't throw punches. I'd hit them where it hurt most. Their water. They wanted to play dirty. Fine. I'd outplay them clean, but I'd make damn sure they'd regret ever thinking they could treat me or this land, like a disposable backdrop to their suburban fantasy. Because this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. By the next morning, I had already made a list, not of names, but of facts, evidence, and options. The HOA thought this would scare me into silence or compliance. Instead, it lit a fire I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't some isolated rancher. With no backup, I had resources, influence, and a memory sharp enough to remember every smug smirk that HOA board had flashed when they tried pushing me around. First, I went back to the footage. I enhanced the video with the help of my nephew, who works in IT, and managed to pull a clearer view of the truck. Not only could we now see a better angle of the license plate, but we also caught a logo faintly reflecting off the side door. It read Green Crest Landscaping. That rang a bell. A few weeks prior, Karen Whitmore had bragged during a community meeting about hiring a new landscaping company to clean up the subdivision and keep things in uniformity. My lawyer friend Rick, who owed me a few favors, made some calls. Within hours, he tracked down a subcontractor under Green Crest who had been recently hired for a stated after-hours project at the HOA's request. Paid in cash. Contract filed. Just a vague invoice labeled late-night irrigation fill. Asterisk, when we reached out to the worker, he denied everything at first. Obviously scared, but after we showed him the video and let him know the sheriff's office was involved, he cracked. I was told it was an old unused well. They said it was abandoned. They paid me to fill it for safety reasons. When I asked who gave the order, he hesitated, then finally admitted. Some blonde lady in a pink suit. She gave me an envelope with cash and said the HOA board approved it. That confirmed what I already knew. Karen, the HOA president. She orchestrated the whole thing and tried to cover it up like a cheap backyard project. But she didn't expect I'd have footage. She didn't expect I'd push back. She definitely didn't expect what came next. Asterisk, now here's where it gets interesting. The HOA community, Silverstone Estates, had long enjoyed a sweetheart water arrangement with the city. Years ago, during a big housing boom, the HOA struck a deal to receive diverted municipal water to keep their artificial lake, golf course, and community garden running, especially during drought restrictions. That water came with strict terms. It wasn't a standard residential supply, was considered excess reserve, offered under an environmental clause requiring zero adverse impact to neighboring landowners. In other words, they had to play nice. If they interfered with anyone around them, especially agricultural property, they could lose that deal instantly. And who sat on the city's Water Utility Oversight Committee as a rotating rural representative? Me. Asterisk, 3 years ago, during the worst drought the county had faced in a decade, I volunteered access to my ranch well to help fill emergency reserves. That goodwill put me on the board rotation. I never thought I'd need that position to fight a personal battle, but life has a strange way of arming you with the right tools at the right time. I gathered everything: video footage, contractor testimony, environmental impact assessments from my land manager, and even livestock stress logs showing the immediate effects of losing our water source. I packaged it all into a formal complaint. To the city, I didn't shout. I didn't accuse wildly. I simply laid out the facts and requested a review of Silverstone Estates' special contract. Asterisk, when I presented the evidence at the next board meeting, the room went silent. Even the city engineer, who had worked closely with Silverstone's planning team, looked stunned. They filled what? He asked. I repeated, calmly. They trespassed onto my ranch and filled my legal, active, private water well with industrial cement. I have proof. The board reviewed the materials, then asked for a closed session. Less than 48 hours later, the city's legal department issued an immediate suspension of Silverstone's water diversion agreement. Asterisk, within a week. By the time the HOA realized how deeply they had stepped into it, the damage was irreversible. You see, water isn't just a utility out here, it's life. In the city, you turn a faucet and expect water to appear. On a ranch, water is something you dig for, protect, monitor, and rely on every single day. The moment they poured concrete into my well, they didn't just block access to water, they threatened my entire ecosystem. My cattle need clean water daily, and we're talking hundreds of gallons. My crops, irrigation system, barn, even the ranch house plumbing, all depended on that one central source. Losing that well wasn't a minor inconvenience, it was a crisis. But the HOA didn't care, at least, not until they lost their own supply. Asterisk, after the city froze their special water contract, the residents of Silverstone Estates went into a tailspin. The HOA board tried to act like nothing had happened at first. They issued a newsletter that downplayed the issue, claiming there had been a temporary administrative disruption, but the truth was everywhere. Sprinklers in the community parks stopped working. The artificial lake began to drop at a visible rate. Lawns turned brown within days, and the once pristine golf course lost its signature green glow and became patchy and yellow. People paid premium property dues to live in a picturesque, well-maintained suburban dream, and now it looked like a forgotten stretch of desert. Asterisk, Karen Whitmore. ever the puppet master, tried to shift the blame. She claimed a rogue contractor had acted without board approval. She told residents the city had overreacted and that the rancher was using the incident for personal vengeance. But that lie couldn't hold. Not when the contractor's testimony, the camera footage, and the text messages directly implicated her. Residents started demanding accountability. One by one, emails flooded the HOA inbox. Why did you go after a working rancher? Did you really pour concrete into someone's well? What happens to our lake now? Asterisk, then came the emergency HOA meeting. It was supposed to be a routine check-in, but over 70 residents showed up, furious and confused. Some brought printouts of the news articles, others held copies of the city's public report, revoking their water privileges. When Karen walked in, the silence was heavy. She took her seat at the front, tried to keep her composure. But the second she opened her mouth, someone shouted from the back, "You've cost us everything." The room erupted. People yelled about dying gardens, ruined landscaping investments, dropping home values. One man shouted, "I just spent $30,000 on a backyard renovation, and now my grass is dead." Another woman screamed, "My HOA fees better cover this disaster you created." Asterisk, Karen tried to defend herself, but there was no defense left. She had declared war on a rancher, underestimated the blowback, and now her entire board was crumbling beneath her. 2 members resigned on the spot. Another publicly apologized and admitted they hadn't even been told about the plan to fill the well. The contractor's texts and the video footage were undeniable. The HOA's lawyer didn't even show up. That night, it was a sinking ship, and Karen was the captain who drilled a hole in her own hull. Asterisk, while Silverstone collapsed into infighting and finger-pointing, I got back to work. Life on the ranch doesn't wait for lawsuits or public drama. I brought in a crew and drilled a new well, this time even deeper and wider, tapping into a lower aquifer we hadn't used before. I spared no expense. Solar-powered pumps, automatic filtration systems, backup water storage, and a full suite of security cameras that fed directly to my phone. If anyone even stepped within 30 feet of that well, I'd know, in real time. Asterisk, I also reached out to the county's agricultural development office with their help. We put in for a grant to upgrade our water systems. The irony wasn't lost on me because of the HOA's sabotage. I ended up with a state-of-the-art water system and government funding to support it. And while they were losing water, paying fines, and facing internal lawsuits from their own residents, I was expanding operations. My cattle were healthy, my crops were thriving, and my ranch had become a local story of resilience and payback done the right way. Asterisk, still, I wasn't content just fixing what was broken. I wanted to make sure something like this never happened to another landowner. So, I worked with the county commissioner to draft new legislation requiring residential developments adjacent to agricultural land to undergo environmental compliance training. It passed. Not only did it make it illegal for HOAs to tamper with neighboring wells or water systems, but it also required regular inspections and established criminal penalties for unauthorized interference. That one bill changed everything. Asterisk, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to threaten, or scream, or storm into Karen's gated community. I let the law speak. I let the city act. And I let the truth expose. In the weeks that followed the water contract freeze, the transformation of Silverstone Estates was almost poetic. The once luxurious neighborhood, known for its manicured lawns, sparkling man-made lake, and pristine golf course, had started to resemble a ghost town in the making. Brown grass, cracked earth, dry fountains, and frustrated residents defined the landscape. The water trucks that used to come weekly for emergency backup were now gone, denied permits by the city after the HOA's contract was terminated. The message was clear. You don't sabotage a neighbor's well and expect to enjoy your private oasis. What struck me most wasn't just the physical decay of the neighborhood, but the silence. That smug, loud HOA board that once sent me formal letters about unauthorized animal noise, unregistered fencing styles, and unsightly ranch operations was now dead quiet. Not a single peep from their Facebook groups. No chirpy newsletters. No uninvited visits with cookies and compliance packets. Karen Whitmore, once the self-proclaimed queen of Silverstone, had gone completely dark. The only sign of her remaining influence was the for sale sign in front of her house, now warped and leaning under the weight of the June sun. I kept my distance. I didn't gloat, didn't give interviews, didn't comment when the local newspaper followed up with "Where are they now?" style questions. My focus was here, on my land, where life had to continue. But people didn't forget. I received letters, handwritten notes from other ranchers, emails from HOA members in different parts of the state. Even small gifts dropped off at the gate from folks who'd followed the story and were tired of HOA tyranny. Thanks for standing your ground. One note read, "You showed them we're not helpless." It would have been easy to think of the story as over, but in reality, the real impact had just begun. Within a month, the county saw a spike in legal complaints filed against different HOA boards, mostly from homeowners who felt threatened. silenced, or misled. My case had turned the spotlight on HOA misconduct across the region. A coalition of farmers and rural homeowners reached out to me and asked if I'd consider speaking at a town hall event. Reluctantly, I agreed. I never liked being in the spotlight, but I understood the value of standing up and sharing the truth. When I walked into that event, I expected a small group, maybe a few dozen folks. Instead, the community center was packed. Over 300 people had shown up, and the organizers had to open the side doors and set up extra chairs. The topic of the night: property rights versus HOA power. My name had been placed on the flyer as a special guest speaker, though I never agreed to that part. Still, when I stepped up to the mic and looked around, I saw the same look in everyone's eyes: tired, frustrated, and ready for change. "I'm not a lawyer," I began. "I'm not a politician. I'm just a man who had concrete poured into his water well by people who didn't like how I lived." There was a long silence, then applause. And I told them everything, not in legal terms, not with dramatic flair, just the facts. What happened to me, how I responded, what the city did, and what it took to make things right. After I finished, a line formed. People shared their own stories: cattle fences that HOAs tried to force them to tear down, wells threatened by development, runoff, barn permits denied for aesthetic reasons. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a growing trend where small groups of unelected HOA boards tried to exert control over lands they didn't own and lives they didn't understand. That night, we launched a new community initiative, Ranch Rights Watch. It wasn't a legal organization, just a network of landowners, homeowners, and legal allies committed to protecting rural property rights and holding HOA boards accountable. We created an online portal, set up a mailing list, and started coordinating with local media. Within 2 weeks, we had over 2,000 members across the state. Meanwhile, the fallout at Silverstone continued. The board was dissolved temporarily, and a city-appointed mediator took over to stabilize the chaos. Karen, unable to sell her home at the original price, took a massive loss and moved out under the radar. Some said she moved back to Arizona. Others claimed she changed her name. Frankly, I didn't care. She was gone, and with her, the cancer that had infected our side of the county. But the lesson stayed with me. For every Karen out there, there are 10 more waiting in the wings: people who believe land is just property and not something sacred, lived on, worked on, and fought for. They don't understand what it means to depend on your land for survival, what it takes to build something from dust, to raise cattle, harvest crops, fix fences in a storm, or dig your own well. They think they can force change with rules and regulations. But what they always forget is that people like us, we endure. A few months after the dust settled, I stood at the edge of my newly drilled well, now protected by steel casing and motion-triggered lights. I looked over the field where my cattle grazed peacefully. The grass was tall again. The birds were back. Water ran freely, clear and cool. And I thought to myself, not about revenge, not about justice, but about balance. That's the thing with land. It always finds its balance, just like nature does. The HOA thought they could control the uncontrollable. They thought they could silence the land, erase its voice with cement and paperwork. But the land spoke back through the people, through the truth, through every drop of water that now flowed stronger than ever. Sometime later, I was invited to speak at a high school agricultural class. They wanted to hear the story of the rancher who beat the HOA. I smiled and agreed, but when I stood in front of those students, I told them something different. This isn't a story about beating anyone, it's a story about standing your ground, knowing your rights, and protecting what matters: your water, your land, and your legacy. If you don't defend it, no one else will. They clapped, but I didn't need the applause. I needed them to understand. Because one day, they'd be the ones running ranches, managing land, raising families on soil their ancestors once stood on. And if someone came to pour concrete over their legacy, I wanted them to know exactly what to do, because when they filled my well with cement, they thought they buried me. They didn't realize they planted something far stronger. And now, we grow,